Welcome to a new episode on this series on setting up a full ECS infrastructure stack to orchestrate Docker containers. Hello, I'm George, and you're on Public Forum. And today's episode will be a show and tell on setting up the auto-scaling resources to support an ECS infrastructure based on EC2 instances. This same infrastructure will orchestrate containers that will run a WordPress web application. And so if this series and the content of this channel lines up with your interests, hit the subscribe button and join me in this journey of learning by doing. So, let's start coding. Previously, I have written the Terraform module for my ECS infrastructure. Today is all about auto-scaling group. And so for a start, I'll pull all the latest code on my local machine by running git pull. And then I'm going to create a branch for today's changes. In the root of my repository, I'll create a new directory and call it ASG, which is short for auto-scaling group. And then I'll cd to this new directory, and then run my script to create my baseline Terraform module code. If I head to my VS Code file explorer, and then expand this new directory called ASG, and then I'll open my backend.tf to set my Terraform backend state container. And then I'll open my main.tf and start coding the resources that I need to set up my auto-scaling group. The first resource is the actual auto-scaling group resource. I'm setting the arbitrary name to WordPress plus the Terraform workspace. The next set of properties that I need to define are the min size, max size, and the desired capacity. Auto-scaling will ensure that the desired capacity is set between the min and max size values. So I'll set my minimum size and desired capacity to 2 and my maximum size to 3. The next property is the termination policies, which is a list of how the auto-scaling will determine what to terminate in the event that it needs to shut down its EC2 instances. So I'm setting the value of this property to the oldest instance. The next property that I need to set is the launch template. This property defines the parameters that are used to launch the actual EC2 instance. The ID property on this block needs to point to a launch template resource ID. So let me create this new resource. Inside this new resource, the first property that I have to set is the instance type with the value coming from a variable. And because I have a new variable in here, I need to define this inside my variables.tf. I'm going to set a default value for this variable to D3A micro, which gives me 2 core CPU, 1 gig memory, and a maximum of 5 gig network performance. This instance type is more cost effective than a usual T2 micro. So I'm going to go back to my main.tf. The next property that I need to set is the image ID. I'm setting the source of this value for this property to a data reference. So my data.tf, I will define a data reference to an AWS AMI resource. I'll set the most recent property to true, and then set the owner's property to a list that contains Amazon and self. And then set the filter block to fetch Amazon Linux 2 image. And then back to main.tf, I can then update the image ID property to pull the value from the data reference that I just set. I'm also going to set the EBS optimized property on this resource to true. The next property that I will set is the VPC security group IDs. This is a list of firewall rules that I need to associate to my EC2 instance once they are up. In my old code, I have set up a security group that I can reuse. So if I open my Explorer and then head to DB and then WordPress and then open main.tf, at line 88 is the AWS security group resource. I'll copy this resource block and then head back to my ASG Terraform modules main.tf, and then I'll paste it here. I need the VPC ID property to point to my default VPC, so I'll set the resource block. And now I can go back to my security group resource and change the VPC ID to reference to this default VPC resource. Inside the ingress block, I'm going to rename the WordPress external port to nginx port. And then head to variables.tf to define this. I'm going to set a default value for this port and set it to 80. This is the same port that I've configured my nginx to run on in the previous episode. So now back to my main.tf. The ingress block is actually saying that my security group is going to be accessible from the public, but I need to change that to lock it down to just within the VPC. I can now go back to my launch template resource and update the VPC security group IDs to contain this new security group that I just created. I also need to set the credit specification property to determine how credits are allocated to the EC2 instance. And I'm going to set the CPU credit specification to standard, which means any CPU limits will be applied. The next property is the IAM instance profile. The ARN property needs to point to an IAM instance profile resource, so let me create this new resource. So as usual, I've set an arbitrary name for this resource, but I also need to set the role property. This needs to point to an IAM role resource, so let me create this resource. So like all the other resources that I've created so far, I've also set an arbitrary name for this resource. I also need to set the assume role policy property, which will be fetched from a data reference of a policy document that assumes an AWS service. So let me head to my data.tf and set this up. So now let me go back to my IAM role resource and plug this in on the assume role policy property. I need to set this role to have all the necessary permissions that are from predefined set of AWS service roles and policies. So the first policy defines a set of permissions to allow for container services to be accessible from the EC2 instance. The second policy contains permissions to configure CloudWatch agents. And lastly, the last policy contains permissions to allow for the EC2 instance to be managed by Systems Manager. And now I can go back to my IAM instance profile resource and set the IAM role reference. With my instance profile all set, I can also go back to my launch template and set the instance profile reference. The next property that I need to set for my launch template is the tag specifications, which is a map of tags that will be passed to the EC2 instance after they are created. You can actually set as many tag fields as you wish to help you identify the instances that are created by the Autoscaling group. Now, the next property that I need to set on my launch template is the user data property. This defines the commands that I need to run to prepare the EC2 instance before formally provisioning it for use. And in my old code, I used user data on my EC2 instance, so I'm going to reuse this and flesh it out for my needs. So if I go back to the main.tf of my old WordPress infrastructure, which is just right here, and then head to the EC2 instance resource. The user data property right here is using a data reference. So let me go to the data.tf and head to that block and then copy this block and then head back to data.tf for my ASG Terraform module and then paste the block in here. This data reference is using a template file, so I need this created inside my ASG Terraform module as well. So in my Explorer, inside ASG, I'm going to create a new directory called template and head back to my old WordPress infrastructure. Inside the template directory, I'm going to copy that template file. This template file contains lines that are not necessary for ASG. So I will clean this up and leave only the ones that I need. On this user data script, I install AWS Systems Manager agent and enable it. I also create a custom Nginx configuration file, which you can see on line number 9. And then lastly, set the ECS configuration file at line 11. This line is very important because this is what's going to associate and register the EC2 instance with the ECS cluster. I've introduced a new variable here called cluster name. So I need to add this inside my data reference. So back to my data.tf, I will add a new variable called cluster name inside the vars block. And then I'm going to source the value from a variable. And so now I need to go to my variables.tf and define this. And then back to my data.tf, I can now remove unused variables. The nginx conf variable in this block has a data reference. So let me go back to my old code and copy this block. This nginx conf data reference is using a template file. So I need to copy that template file from my old WordPress infrastructure. On this template file, I will rename the external port variable reference to nginx port. I will also remove the server name line because my nginx application will end up talking to a load balancer. And then back to my data.tf, I will change the template and the variable names to nginx port. And then I can also remove the unused variable. And then back to my ASG main.tf, I can now update the user data property to point to the appropriate data reference. And that's my launch template. And to finish the overall setup, I can now go back to my autoscaling resource and update the reference to the launch template. And to make sure that the latest version of my launch template is used, I'm going to set the version property like this. And that's my Terraform module for my core autoscaling group infrastructure. But before I wrap up this episode, let me try to validate the module and fix any issues with the code. So I'll head over to my terminal and then run Terraform init without backend. And then run Terraform validate. So I got 2 errors in here, so let's go and fix this. It says line 19 on main.tf. And I think this is because of the incorrect reference to the name of the resource. So let's head over to the security group resource, which is called ec2secgrep. So let's fix that. And then the other error is on line 50 on main.tf. And I think it's also an incorrect reference to the AWS resource. So let's have a look at how I define my default VPC. And I actually use default instead of VPC. So let me copy that. And then back to my terminal. I'm going to run Terraform validate again. And now everything is successful. Let's have another logical break at this point. And on the next episode, I'll write the necessary Terraform modules for my load balancer resources, and hopefully, I'll be able to make the necessary integration changes for all 3 Terraform modules before I start standing up the final infrastructure stack. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments below and send me some likes if you find this useful. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like the content of this channel. If you have any questions on this episode or any episodes on this channel, drop them over to the Discord server. I'll put a link on this in the description below. That's it for now. Until next time. And as always, keep learning and stay safe.